You are listening to our dear friend Oneida Elder Joanne Shenandoah with harpist Bambi Niles. I hope she is doing well tonight. She may be listening. Looking forward to see her. Maybe she's going to be going up to Woodstock with us. Well, who knows? Who knows? Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Bob Hieronymus, and our executive producer and research assistant, Laura Cordner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington. Now, before we get to our guest tonight, Mitch Horowitz, some updates on just some of our ongoing projects that you've asked about. The light bus left for Florida yesterday. So, VW fans traveling on I-95 today and tomorrow should email us if you catch a ray of light or a sighting as she's trailered down to East Coast West VW Restorations in good old St. Augustine, Florida, for the next step in her reassembly. And once again, we want to thank Rolling Stone, USA Today, the New York Times, Life Magazine, Associated Press, CBS, and NBC TV, and nearly every newspaper in the United States for displaying this particular bus over the last several decades. So much tender, loving care has been showered on Light from the crew at J.C. Customs in Glen Burnie. Thank you, Johnny Chrysomalis, and the whole gang down there. The clear coat job you did on the Woodstock bus looks absolutely fabulous. The bus really looks like, well, real. It looks real. Thanks for cleaning out your clear coat station and also for being so careful with the artwork on this bus. We knew we were blessed when we found JC Customs even before that rainbow. That was amazing that this rainbow, when that bus moved into JC Customs, so did a rainbow over the actual station. It was amazing. And it followed the bus all the way into the storage bay. Wow, thanks for those videos on that. Thanks to Robert Skinner. And for your advice on the clear coat choice, which was the right one. Now, may the light be shining on Fallon Taylor and her crew from East Coast VW as they finish the round-trip drive from Florida to Maryland and back with the trailer bed this weekend. Fallon and Meredith went above and beyond what was expected, adding to the already extraordinary skill and warm spirit that was lavished on Light. Fallon Taylor knows what she's doing. The Light is in her competent hands now through the winter, getting seats and interior paneling, lights, mirrors, wipers, bumpers, and all the trimmings. Thanks, John Wesley Chisholm. You found a winner with East Coast VW Restorations and Fallon Taylor. You know, there is now a discussion of a caravan of VW buses and Beetles driving from California to Baltimore and then following our bus up to Woodstock in August of 2019 to celebrate its 50th anniversary. On November the 27th, my mural, Historic Views of Baltimore, 1752 to 1857, which was hung a couple of weeks ago at the Baltimore's Mitchell Courthouse. Well, that's going to be unveiled officially this coming November the 27th by our mayor, Baltimore, Catherine Pugh. And for a little while, it was at the War Memorial Building. So come in and take a look at what Baltimore is, that is, what Baltimore's Inner Harbor looked like centuries ago. Our Yellow Submarine book number 2 is still in the making. Beatle archivist Mark Lewison said of Volume 1 that I was the Yellow Submarine Oracle. I never knew that, just learned about it. And our dear friend Sir George Martin, who's no longer with us in his physical body, but he's always hanging around me, wrote the introduction of the first volume. In the weeks ahead, we will be featuring artist Bill Morrison to do a thorough review of his Beatles Yellow Submarine Titan Comics graphic novel that has woken up the remaining 2 Beatles who keep their magic alive. We've been working for far too long around the clock in the last couple of years, and we are looking for a break to catch up on our rest. Tonight, our guest, both hours, is Brother Mitch Horowitz, who over the past 32 years, actually we've been on the air about 33 years, but the past 32 years he has joined us 5 times. This will be his 6th time that he appeared on 21st Century Radio. Last time was 2014. The first time was 2009. Well, he's going to be here to discuss his latest award-winning book, The Miracle Club. And our dear friend Dean, good old Dean Radin, said, what did he say? Well, said, for the clearest and most eminently rational description of exactly how to test the power of your thoughts, there is simply no better choice. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio.
Thank you. Delighted to be here, my man.
How's your pitching arm? Is it okay?
I'm doing well, yeah. I just got back from Chicago. I was speaking at the Theosophical Society. We had a wonderful workshop and a lecture. And I love being out there. Love the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
Just flew back into New York City tonight. We had to make an emergency landing at Newark because of technical problems on the plane. But here I am, and all is well.
Boy, I'm glad you are.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this book.
Thank you.
I had to put together my own personal questions because
I appreciate it.
Because to me, I learned so much. I always learn a lot from you, Mitch.
Thank you. Back at you.
Now, you argue in this book that for all its shortcomings and for all its being disparaged by critics as a dogma of wishful delusion, New Thought in its essentials is true and can be tested. In your experience, that is. Why is this important at a time when our planet is being laid waste by corporate powers dominated by billionaires?
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why it's important is because people need to realize that they have more power than they give themselves credit for, that our minds do exercise a degree of causation and creativity in a very concrete sense over the events and the relationships and the ways of life that we experience around us. And our minds are more than just tools of cognition and motor function. They are also tools of causation. And we are living through a time where the standard materialist descriptions of life, of men and women as just flesh and bone, of mind as just a localized phenomena produced by gray matter, they no longer cover all the bases. We know too much, we've seen too much, we've witnessed too much, and we've researched, we've testified, we've created records, and our thoughts do have abilities that extend beyond the physical. And I want people to hear that with a sense of joy. I want people to hear that with a sense of possibility. I want people to understand that whatever they're seeing going on in the world around them, or whatever difficulties or challenges they might be facing in their private lives, they have greater options than they know. And the Miracle Club tries to not only lead us to that conclusion, but give us techniques and methods that can be used to experiment with that contention.
You know, this may be your best book.
I appreciate that.
No.
It came from the heart. It's my first truly fully practical book. I've previously written largely as a historian, and I've always classified myself as a believing historian, but this was a book where I felt I really needed to get into the nitty-gritty of technique and methods.
Mm-hmm. But you wrote that the most radical idea of modern life is that thoughts are causative.
Yes.
Now, why is that important when starvation is becoming common and children's lives are being destroyed?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I point out in the book is that we live under many laws and forces, or at least we experience many laws and forces. Even if one believes that mentality or consciousness or awareness or whatever you want to call it is the ultimate arbiter of reality, and it may well be, nonetheless, we occupy a physical framework where we experience a vast number of laws and forces, including accidents, including geography, including politics, including culture. So there are global problems in our world that can be traced back to all the factors that I've just mentioned. But one tool that we possess, and this is fantastic enough in itself, one tool that we possess is that of mentation and that of thought causation. And our point of view, our perspective, our mental pictures, our emotionalized thoughts, they really do play a process, an extraordinary process, not only in communicating with other people in an extra-physical way, but in helping to actualize events. So I'm certainly not one of these people that maintains, and in fact I oppose the perspective, that there's one law of attraction or one ultimate mental super law that controls everything, which implies, if you follow that to its extreme, that suffering people are to blame for their own suffering. I reject that. I reject that as plain as day. However, I would say that one can reject that and understand that there are many forces in our world, but we are omitting so much of our own humanity if we neglect to understand that one of those forces is thought causation. And I urge people to not lose their taste for personal experimentation, to try this, to work with this, because they'll find things in their lives that may open possibilities to them that they never knew existed.
Wow, that's for sure. There's so much to almost everything you say. When you talk, you generally talk on several levels at one time. Now,
I've been told that.
Well, and that's
by
that's
my friends and my critics.
I'm not trying to be critical.
No, I
mean,
hear you.
And because some of us want that, because as we all know, like that's one of the reasons why I love to use symbols. You got symbols have a minimum of 7 different levels of meaning, and so that so many people. I mean, people are getting into a lot of conspiracy theories these days, and totally missing so much of the inner stuff, because they're still hung up on what they like to try to find is the cause for all of our problems, which they like to say is the Illuminati.
Yeah.
Even though the Illuminati disappeared 12 years or so after it was born.
That's correct. It was born in Bavaria in 1776, same year as our American Revolution, and within about a decade, the Bavarian aristocracy had passed laws against secret societies and had largely hounded the Illuminati out of existence. But people cling to this point of view because it's a misdirected instinct almost, that people feel that there's not sufficient transparency in our lives today. And they're absolutely correct. There's not sufficient transparency in government. There certainly isn't sufficient transparency in the financial sector. There's not sufficient transparency in your health insurance company. But rather than getting into the weeds and really dealing with those questions, which are valid questions, that all that legitimate outrage, all that legitimate urge to rebellion gets waylaid, and gets directed towards this fantasy idea of guys in robes standing around in a star chamber somewhere, pulling the strings or making incantations over skulls and cauldrons. If I was a pharmaceutical company executive who was hell-bent on ripping off his customers, nothing would make me happier. Nothing would make me happier than the proliferation of these conspiracist ideas. I'd be Alex Jones's biggest fan because it directs people away from where the problems of economic disparity and transparency really exist, and direct them toward looking at a group that not only hasn't been around for well over 2.25 centuries, but in fact, when they were around, they espoused values of radical equality, separation of church and state, social polity. Thomas Jefferson himself, who didn't go in for anything supernatural in his personal life, wrote in praise of the Illuminati in 1800 because he saw them as offering a radical expression, to be sure, bound up with occult symbols and all kinds of initiatory rites and ceremonies, but he saw them offering an occult expression of some of the same radical ideals that he saw behind the American Revolution. So I turn the whole equation on its head. I think the Illuminati is something that should intrigue us, that should invite our intelligent inquiry, and when you make that inquiry, you'll be astonished to discover that in many ways this secretive group had its reasons for secrecy because it was being oppressed by its own government.
Indeed.
Had its reasons to want to undermine a society that held people down into the positions that they were born in. If you were born a peasant in Bavaria at that time, you were going to die a peasant. There was no more social mobility, more or less, than there had been during the medieval time. These guys wanted to take a sledgehammer to that. They were revolutionaries. Not only have we misunderstood this notion of an Illuminati existing in the current world today doing nefarious things, which is fantasy, and fantasy that only benefits people who actually do need the light of transparency shined on them. But we've misunderstood who the Illuminati were in history. They were heroic, they were extraordinary, and they were hounded out of existence within 10 years because they threatened the aristocratic government in Bavaria. That's the real story of the Illuminati.
Thank you. I also want to let our listeners know you're one of the best books in the world ever written and around these subjects is your book, Occult America.
Thank you.
I remember that first interview I had with you so many years ago. Actually, it wasn't that many years ago. But
well, it was close to 10. That book came out in the fall of 2009. So actually, not all that many years ago. Although it feels like a long time ago.
It sure
does.
That was
my first book.
Yeah. Great book. Great book.
Thank you.
All right, time out here on the playing field with our guest Mitch Horowitz, The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality, Inner Traditions, www.mitchhorowitz. I'll spell that for you, HOROWITZ.com, MitchHorowitz.com, or follow him on social media, where he is very active.
Give me your time, your poor, your hollow glass is yearning to breathe free.
You know what I was surprised to learn when studying the Statue of Liberty? That liberty for real women is the key to humanity's survival on this planet. Truly. And also that Lady Liberty has Native American roots, and that America has reverence for the female half of divinity, or the goddess, at its very foundation. Powerful women and role models for balance are all part of our new book, The Secret Life of Lady Liberty, Goddess in the New World. It's a new way to understand America's history and future. Buy your copy today at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble, or from our website, secretlifeofladyliberty.com. That's secretlifeofladyliberty.com. Just chock full of all new reasons to love the United States of America.
This is Dr. Jacques Vallée. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronymus, the reference in the study of the paranormal.
Oh, yes, Dr. Jacques Vallée. We saw him last year. That's right. Yes, last year. Wow. Very important works that he has done over the many years. And he's hard to reach these days. It really is. Our guest, of course, is Mitch Horowitz. I'm sure he knows Dr. Jacques Vallée. Don't you, Mitch?
I do. He's a friend. He and I have worked together, collaborated at conferences together, and he gave me an endorsement for the Miracle Club, which I was very touched by.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed.
In fact, one of the greatest experiences of my life was watching one night out west, along with some friends. I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind with Jacques.
Oh,
he's
my.
the basis for one of the characters in the film, the French scientist Truffaut. And it was a great thrill. It was almost like watching, Batman with the late, great Adam West. So it's quite a pleasure.
Yes. I think he's one of the greatest UFO researchers, period.
He's one of the greatest, and he's one of the few that we have. Jacques, he's a true scientist. He's impeccable in his credentials and in his ethics, and he's done so much for UFO research, among other things.
Yeah, sure has. Now, back to our focus here on your book. Why may positive thinking prove to be the most radical and useful idea of today.
It's interesting. We think of positive thinking as something sort of dowdy and old. It can almost seem like something that belongs to a previous generation, like Norman Vincent Peale's Power of Positive Thinking. But the truth is, the progenitors of the positive mind movement, which is sometimes called New Thought, they had just an extraordinary instinct for truths about human nature, which are being heavily validated today in all kinds of experiments across different fields of science, including the placebo response, serious clinical psychical research, neuroplasticity, studies of precognition, interdimensionality, retrocausality, and quantum theory. And what I am finding again and again, and I go into some of this in the Miracle Club, is that there are many researchers today who are validating the insights of the New Thought movement, of the Mind Power movement, without even knowing that people in the late 19th and early 20th century, by instinct and experiment and personal experiment alone, came up with some of the same ideas. Here's one example. A couple of years ago, the Center for Placebo Studies at Harvard University Medical School did a study on a migraine drug. And this was an unprecedented placebo study because it was the first time that researchers tested the placebo response when using an active drug, not a sugar pill or an inert substance, but an active drug that is widely prescribed to sufferers of migraines. And the Harvard researchers found that when subjects were given positive information about the drug, they did better with it. So the results that existed in a control group were spiked when people received positive information about a drug that was already an active substance. So this is revolutionary because it suggests that the placebo effect is actually ever operative. It's going on all the time. It's not just something that happens when you're misled about an inert substance to believe that it's an actual active pharmaceutical or treatment. But in fact, our sense of expectation, whether positive, negative, or somewhere in between, actually affects how well we do with our medications and other substances that we take. So it's an important study. But do you know, and I told this to the director of the Harvard program, Ted Kapchuk, the great French mind theorist Émile Coué, who was an early progenitor of New Thought, he made that exact same observation when he was a pharmacist in northwestern France in the early 20th century. He noticed himself that when he spoke in favor of a certain formulation or drug to his own customers, they would frequently report doing better with it than if he said nothing at all. And Coué, who was very much interested in hypnotism and the powers of suggestion and the use of mantras and affirmations, Coué made the exact same observation as the Harvard researchers well over a century ago. And I asked Ted Kapchuk, the program director, if the study had been designed with Coué in mind, if any of the researchers had heard of Coué's own findings. And he said no, they had not, but he was aware of who Coué was, and he agreed that what his researchers found could comport with Coué's insights. So this is one of many, many examples in which mind theorists, who were in many cases associated with mysticism, associated with spirituality, had these early remarkable and very shrewd instincts for human nature, for human behavior, for the possibilities of the mind. And I think it's time for us now to come full circle and revisit the insights of these early theorists, because these were modern mystics of real power, of real insight. And I say that not just based on my own experience and based on the experience of other seekers who have testified as to the efficacy of these methods, but I say it because science, in a very real and plain sense, as I was just describing, is now validating some of these ideas. And I think this is gold. This is gold right at our threshold, and we must not We must not neglect it.
Hey, one of the critiques of your book called, oh yes, it was David Lynch, said Mitch is solid gold. That's pretty
Grateful
good.
For that.
In the old days, there used to be a grade above A.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, it was called H. It meant honor.
Oh,
yes, and I
like
think
that.
you got an H. Yeah, good going.
I like that.
Yeah, so do I. I'd like to have that too.
I'm glad my parents didn't know about that, or they would have been,
giving you H.
after me. Why am I coming home not with better grades? I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, your conviction is that the true nature of life is to be generative.
Yes.
Now, what does that mean, to be
Well,
generative?
we in the West are taught that men and women are made in the image of the Creator, are made in the image of the higher. Or, as the great Hermetic principle goes, as above, so below. As above, so below. That great Greek-Egyptian expression is probably a cosmic law of life. And if we accept the contention, which we find in our own scripture, that men and women are made in the image of the higher, then it stands to reason that we too are here to create. We too are here to generate, to produce, to see through our projects in the world, whatever they may be, whatever they may be. So my contention is that the human wish to aspire, to attain, to create, in whatever your walk of life is sacred. That in and of itself is sacred. And at this point in my search, I don't get hung up, frankly, on questions of identification versus non-identification, attachment versus non-attachment, ego versus essence. To me, it's very plain that for this limited space of time, we are here in this physical world. We are here to produce. We are here to generate. We are here to create. Human aspiration should be honored. The way one of my philosophical heroes puts it, Neville Goddard, is this: desires are the voice of God. Desires are the voice of God speaking to you, urging you to take a step forward, to climb one more rung on the ladder of what you're doing, whatever it may be. That doesn't mean the individual is free from ethics or doesn't owe things to other people or can act with some sort of violence. I think we have all kinds of great religious literature that tells us otherwise. We have wonderful and vital guardrails, the Beatitudes, the Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita. All these things demonstrate what we owe to the transcendent and what we owe to one another. But again, the dictum and the central principle of Western life found in the earliest passages of Scripture is that men and women were created in the image of the higher, of the Creator itself. So it stands to reason that if we take that seriously, then we are here to create. And I encourage people, I really encourage people to get in touch with their desires and not to slice and dice them with some kind of melancholia or wondering, am I being materialist? Am I being selfish? Am I being attached? You're being creative. Mm-hmm. And that's a central principle for me in this book.
The act of creation is godlike.
It's godlike.
Yes,
it's
indeed.
Sacred.
That's why I like being an artist. I mean,
Exactly. Look what you've done. Your murals, the environmental expositions that you've done, the beautiful, beautiful paintings and drawings that you've done, some of which are in my possession, your writing, your radio show, you're opening up people to senses of possibility. And there may be a listener whose life is dedicated to a different pursuit. He or she may be into commerce, or maybe a soldier, or maybe something else. But everyone is doing something that involves establishing their own sense of self in the world. And I think that is sacred.
Well, I also love what you said on page 18 in your book. Do you mind if I read it?
Please.
Being generative means providing a concrete service, not just expecting payouts from the world in the forms of remuneration, applause, contracts, and open doors, are you offering a service
Yeah.
or just placing demands on others, cornering people to read your novel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, service is really, to me, I'm sorry, I'm a Virgo, so I'm in trouble already,
So was my mother.
But you know how they are service oriented. If someone asked me not too long ago how I think of meditation and the other things, and I said what I think basically is meditation is listening to the Supreme Being, and prayer is actually talking to the Supreme Being, but service is the key in the sense of lending a helping hand to those who need it without remuneration, without even anyone noticing you, which is what used to be in regards in philanthropy in the old days, but you don't have that now so much. You have today everyone's labeled who they are when they're giving away things and that kind of thing.
Right.
But
I think it's vitally important that what a person does and produces in the world be part of some kind of circuitry of benefit. Something has to be delivered to the individual that is enhancing of his or her own ability to be productive. So it's not about just getting one over on people by selling, swampland or selling stocks that are worthless. I mean, that ultimately is an act of destruction. It's an act of violence, because whatever a person is doing, in order for it to be nonviolent, I don't mean physically nonviolent necessarily. I mean, there's certain valid reasons for self-defense, but what I mean by nonviolence is not violating someone else's ability to strive toward their own highest sense of attainment. So if you're ripping people off, or if you're misleading people, you're not being productive. You're being destructive. Productiveness is part of a circuitry that aids and abets another person to seek after his or her own sense of highest potential. Whatever product you're providing should in some way, whether directly or indirectly, aid the individual in his or her seeking of highest self.
Thank you. And with that, we have to take our last break of this hour on 21st Century Radio with our guest Mitch Horowitz, The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality, published by our friends at Inner Traditions, www.mitchhorowitz.com, or follow him on social media, where he is enormously very active.
Hello, this is Ingo Swann, the author of Penetration, The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy. And you're listening to the wonderful 21st Century Radio with the amazing Dr. Bob Hieronymus.
Hey, Brother Ingo. Ingo, I know you're still out there. You're probably listening tonight. Just wanted to let you know that we're still working on your biography and documentary. And looking forward to... Last time we saw Ingo, actually, was not in the physical, but at the same time we were with other ufologists at some time. Okay, there you go. Now, okay, we're back with our guest, Mitch Horowitz, and I'm going to give him a surprise question. I don't know if he can answer this. And you ready for this one, Mitch?
Please, I love it.
All right. Now, you note that our popularized notions of Eastern theology of non-attachment are cherry-picked. Why is this a problem?
Well, I think it's a problem because, first of all, within our alternative spiritual culture, I think we are settling into certain orthodoxies, and orthodoxies always stifle the spiritual search. One of those orthodoxies, and you'll see it repeated in various forms of popular literature, and you'll overhear people saying it to one another at spiritual centers or growth centers or what have you, is that one has to be on the lookout against so-called spiritual materialism, is that one has to be on the lookout for not giving over to attachment or identification or acting from the ego. These are just terms. They're just terms. We don't have any agreement really, not one that covers all the bases, on what consciousness itself is. And when we speak in terms of ego or personality or attachment versus non-attachment, identification versus non-identification, in many regards, we are drawing upon concepts that appeared in very different languages, very different cultures, very different traditions that have their inception in the Vedic and Buddhist cultures that grew at a very deeply caste-based societies where social mobility was really an impossibility. And these concepts have come down to us, Western seekers in the 21st century, through translations of translations of translations, very often unmoored from their original cultures and contexts, and repeated by authors and translators who themselves very often do not speak or read the original languages in which these things were first conveyed. Mm-hmm. And my contention is that the Western seeker, and I speak in terms of the West only because that's my own context, my own vantage point, I'm not just limiting it, but the Western seeker will never be truly happy, will never be truly satisfied or at home in his or her own skin without pursuing some sense of personal aspiration. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely vital. It's critical. It is natural, innate to our psyches. I think it's almost a universal fact of life that the individual today is absolutely needful of expressing some form of aspiration, attainment, creativity, not to the exclusion of transcendental ethics, but the neglect of that and slicing and dicing it because one is unsure about whether it indicates the ego being in the driver's seat. My contention is that you should throw all of that out. Throw all of it out. These concepts of ego and attachment, I think, have been overused and have been fashioned into almost a kind of orthodoxy catechism within our alternative spiritual culture, and I don't think that they'll serve the needs and the happiness of the individual. I think that only attainment, achievement, broadly defined, not just in the material sense, but I don't disparage the material either. These things are vital to the individual's capacity to be happy. I'm not saying that other considerations don't need to be brought in. The greatest wisdom on the matter, I think, was articulated by Christ in saying, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God's what is God's. We belong to worlds that are seen and that are unseen, but I think a non-negotiable principle within that framework is that the individual must be creative, must aspire.
So you do not view non-attachment as a workable goal for those of us raised in the West?
That's correct. That is my point of view. And I say that as a seeker. That's where I am at this point in my life as a seeker. I don't think that's a workable goal for modern Western men and women.
Well, if we could, we'd give you a free trip to Bermuda on that one, because I think that's absolutely what the problem has been, especially, in the 60s, when the East was making such a hard push on the West coming over here, and we had so many gurus coming in and out, trying to create various homes for themselves over here in the West. It caused real problems from the standpoint of our really not understanding what their teachings were. And that was very unfortunate. I think it set us back a little bit. So congratulations on your free trip to Bermuda.
I'm all for it.
Okay. I don't blame you. I'd be all for it myself here. We only have, we got enough time for this question. I enjoyed so much your little discussion of Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah.
How was his "Yes, I Can" so important to his life. Boy, this is a real lesson.
It's wild. Sammy's autobiography, Yes, I Can, beautiful book, published the year of my birth, 1965. I'm looking at it right now. I remember my mother bringing it home from the New York Public Library, and I discovered the book myself a couple of years ago. And he was such a remarkable man. He was very, very deeply in touch with himself. And he came to the conclusion that all the challenges and all the difficulties that he was facing in life were pointing him in the direction of one thing, and that was self-expression, attainment, fulfillment of his ambition in the highest way possible. And he really sorted this all out and thought this all out in a deeply sensitive, thoughtful way. And contrary to some of our judgments and kind of scripted responses on the spiritual path, Sammy Davis felt that his highest sense of self had to come hand in hand with his breakthrough as a star, as a performer, as a success, as a worldwide phenomenon. And some people could shake their heads at that and say, oh boy, Horowitz has it all wrong. He's turning the spiritual search on its head. And I challenge people in this book that if you think that his attainment or anybody's attainment didn't leave him happy, well, would he have been happy without it? And from what vantage point do I judge him? Because you can't renounce something or you can't weigh in with an opinion on something until you've experienced it. Inner empiricism is the only method of measuring things that we have on the spiritual path. Experience is the only empiricism that we have on the spiritual path. So before you judge another person, listen to that person very carefully. And that book was a huge inspiration for me because he was a thoughtful, sensitive, flawed man, and I felt his search was one that brought him into the spotlight and into outer life as profoundly as another person's search might bring him into the interior life. I thought there was great substance to this man, and I consider what he writes in that book very carefully.
Well, he went through some terrible experiences.
Truly.
And I'm so glad you put this in your work. Friends, if you got a copy of this book, go to pages 14 and 15. You've got to read that. I got to read this part, too. He said, my talent was the only thing that made me a little different from everybody else, and it was all that I could hope would shield me because I was different. I'd weighed it all over and over again, and what have I got? No looks, no money, no education, just talent. Just where do I want to go? Well, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was very moving, and I'm so glad you put that in there. And there are many other African-American musicians that went through very similar things. One particular handsome one, gosh, I'm sorry, his name has slipped my mind, just because he said, he was holding hands with a white woman with blonde hair.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he got killed. He got killed. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name right now, but he was such a beautiful guy, and his music was so nice, and he was such a key quality person.
Yeah. And
got wiped out because some redneck down there in the South decided he should never touch a white woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, the section that you were reading from Sammy Davis's autobiography, I've actually written it on an index card, and I carry it with me because it was just one of the most defining, stirring statements I had ever come across. Success has a transcendent quality to it. Mm-hmm. It can't be a moral success. It can't be violent success. But when it's success that engenders or doesn't disrupt another person's productivity, I think it can be as much a transcendent pursuit as anything that we're doing seated on a yoga cushion. And I think Sammy Davis embodied that. And his book opened up a lot for me, frankly.
Well, it's understandable. Geez, a whiz. A guy who has, I remember some of my limited time that I spent with Jimi Hendrix when we were just walking along up in New York, walking along the street up there, and seeing a guy sitting on the curb, crying and feeling just like his world is just falling apart, and watching Jimmy do this, what he did was he just walked over them, put his hands on them, and sat down with him. Now, when Jimmy usually was walking around, he usually had quite a few people around, suits around, in control of him. And boy, were they unhappy about him taking his time to spend with this poor young man. But what a difference it made in this young man's life. I mean, and the things that Jimmy had to go through were very, very similar to what many black men, especially Sammy Davis Jr. and others, had to go through. They had to be very careful, very, very careful. Oops, we're about almost run out of time for this hour, and we will return with Brother Mitch Horowitz, The Miracle Club, How Thoughts Become Reality, published by Inner Traditions, www.mitchhorowitz, HOROWITZ, something like that.com. And here comes my favoriteest song in the world.
Stimulating talk and breaking news on Talk Radio 680 WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.